Most of the time, most of the models I have for living a meaningful life are in the context of family, And so a lot of people my age are, you know, getting married, having kids, and that's kind of what they're devoting a lot of their time and energy to. And that's where they're at least hopefully wanting to find a sense of meaning and purpose. And so I guess I'm struggling with like, okay, maybe I'm not gonna have a family anytime soon or ever, you know. If not, and if I'm not doing some kind of unusual job or full-time ministry or something, then like what will make life meaningful?
Yeah.
I know that's a really kind of basic question that
Yeah.
everybody's asking, but like I don't have a good answer for it,
Yeah.
you know? When I graduated college and got serious about the faith and started trying to grapple with the sexual identity stuff, I think I treated it as like this is my one big thing. And if I can just address that, I'll probably basically be good. Like that'll be my hero's journey and then it'll be over. And now I'm discovering, oh gosh, this whole thing is fractal. It's there's there's many cycles and many iterations of everything. And so I guess the point I'm getting at is, ironically, the failure of that relationship, I don't, in my estimation, didn't really have anything to do with the sexual identity stuff, but a lot of other things. But I've always been of this mentality that, oh, if I can just deal with the sexual identity thing, then relationships will work, life will be good, I'll find meaning and purpose and happiness, everything will be fulfilling, I'll just ride off into the sunset and it'll be fine, it'll be great.
Yeah.
And it's not happening. And that's been a really jarring realization. And I feel really foolish for, you know, thinking that, but
You shouldn't.
here
You've
we
been
are.
programmed to think in that way since the time you started consuming, Hollywood media in America, because that's exactly what that media sets you up to imagine is the pattern of the world. Okay. Oh, Ryan, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit to me?
Okay. So I'm 28. I live in Texas. I grew up in Alabama. Um, Grew up going to kind of a semi-rural, hellfire brimstone Southern Baptist church. You know, um, was a really trusting kid, so I wanted to believe it really badly. But then I would sit in church reading Revelation basically every week, and so the pastor would be up there screaming stuff. I'd be sitting in the back reading Revelation, like I don't know what to do with all this.
Of
And
all the parts of the Bible to read as a kid.
yeah, I don't know why. It was really charming to me. And then, I mean, so like I said, I wanted to believe it all. And by the time I got into middle school, I was just reading a lot of stuff. My mom gave me a copy of Mere Christianity, but I had the audacity to just say, I think Lewis is too pedestrian. And so I was reading Chesterton and Sam Harris, actually, Letter to a Christian Nation. Tried to read Dostoevsky, didn't really get it, I was a little too young. And so, kind of from an early age was just like exploring the territory a lot. And things finally started clicking with me when I went in high school, I started going to a cooperative Baptist church. I don't know if you're familiar. They're the group that split off from the Southern Baptists over the issue of women in leadership.
Really? So they're
Yeah.
they're for it and the Southern Baptists were against?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, depending on who you ask, the Southern Baptists experienced either a conservative resurgence or a conservative takeover. And the Cooperative Baptists split off and said, we're going to do our own thing. So they're a smaller denomination. And nowadays they're starting kind of what it sounds like the CRC is doing, their fight over homosexuality. But that's the church that I got baptized in. That's where things finally started to click. And I wasn't super concerned about all the theological things regarding whatever women in ministry, stuff like that. But it was around the same age in high school that I was going to that church that I also started developing homosexual romantic feelings. And so decided my senior year of high school that I was gay, went into college and kind of acted that out, but theologically was becoming much more interested in the faith as well, and becoming more kind of firm in my sort of traditional theological convictions, and those two paths were divergent, to say the least. And by the end of college, I just felt like I was completely coming apart. I had these theological convictions over here, but I was doing this kind of promiscuous gay thing on the side, and it wasn't clicking. It wasn't making sense. And then I still don't know how to describe it, but I graduated college, and there was an evening.
Did you go to a secular college or a Christian college?
Went to a secular college.
Okay.
Yeah. And studied computer science, by the way. I write software for a living. And right after I graduated college, something just clicked into place. I had a conversation with some older wise people, and they just kind of encouraged me to see God as Father. And it wasn't a very compelling or interesting conversation, but for some reason that just clicked stuff into place. And all of a sudden things just started gelling. And I moved to Denver and got really involved in a what do they call it? A Converge Baptist church out there. I think it's like John Piper's denomination. And was doing the full-time software developer thing, and was going to this church that's like a tiny Baptist church full of old people. It sounds kind of like Living Stones. And the youth pastor left, and I was one of the only people in the building that was under 40. So they thrust me into that role, as tends to happen. And
that's what happens in a small church.
Yes. And so I was this kind of shy, awkward guy who writes software for a living, talks to computers for a living, who was now a youth pastor. And it's like, I don't know what to do here, y'all.
Yeah.
And I was pretty open with the church, like, hey, y'all, I just, like, 2 years ago, I was living an actively gay life. So y'all are cool with me doing this? And they're like, yeah, whatever,
That's also true of a small church.
Right.
They're so desperate. It's like,
they didn't have options. So like, whatever. Yeah, we'll keep an eye on him, but whatever.
That's right. What's the worst that could happen?
Right. So, and it was a really challenging experience. I mean, it really forced me to kind of start working through stuff. And, it was Gen Z kids who have their stuff going on, And so anyway, I did that for about 1.5 years, and then I moved to Texas. And the same pattern emerged. Basically, I was going to a small sort of Baptist church, and eventually they suddenly needed a youth pastor, and some lady in the church supposedly had a vision and said, I just feel like Ryan would be really good at this. And so once again, I became a youth pastor, and it was around that time that I actually met Tim York at a meetup, the guy who gave you a violin and came to faith through beauty.
Sitting right here. Yeah.
Yep. And he, at the time I only knew of Jordan Peterson, but he encouraged me to look you up and Pajot. And once I did, stuff really started clicking and melding in a really new way. And I was trying really hard not to infect my youth group kids with that, but a lot of my teaching with them was kind of me working through these ideas. And so I started talking a lot about patterns and trying to keep it reasonable, trying not to go into all the language and stuff, but like, I don't know. And I noticed something interesting during that, which was once I started talking that way, they got way more engaged. They were way more interested in this kind of me helping them map the territory, rather than just me saying, here's a Bible passage, let me tell you what it means. Like, that wasn't as compelling to them as, let me zoom out and describe to you these patterns that make sense of your life and make sense of the whole Bible and can kind of cohere stuff together. And I don't know, I just found that super interesting, and I'm no longer in that role or at that church. I got engaged and moved to a new city, and then we ended that relationship, and that was about a month ago. And so I'm kind of in this place where I'm just trying to figure out, like, now what? Because a part of me is interested in orthodoxy, but I don't know. I just have reservations, I guess. I mean, I think I'm in that spot that a lot of people are in, where the evangelical world seems just too goofy, but moving to the Orthodox church seems like kind of a LARP. Like, oh, I'm just pretending, and it's not really going to solve the problem that I'm really grappling with. And so I don't know. That's where I am right now.
I think there's a lot of people that are in a similar boat as you in that, and some seem to be leaning into orthodoxy and maybe attending churches now. I mean, part of the difference between the evangelicals and the Orthodox is, especially with some evangelical churches, I'd regularly have, because we live in a community with a lot of African Americans, and it's a fair number in this church, and so people would come in, and after one Sunday they'd be like, "Pastor, I want to join your church." And it's like, why don't you come for 6 months? And first of all, if you're still coming in 6 months, then we'll know something that we don't know now, because I'm not going to go through all the stuff to have you join this church, only to have you stop coming a month from now. So keep coming,
Yep.
get to know people. And by the time you're ready to officially join, you'll be ready to officially join.
Right.
So,
yeah.
but the Orthodox, they have their process and their catechesis and all of that. So, well, let me ask you, what attracts you? Have you been to many Orthodox churches? What has been your experience so far with it?
Yeah. So I was going to an Antioch, and I think that's how you pronounce it, Orthodox Church in Fort Worth for a while. And I was just attending when I could, because I was a Baptist youth pastor, right? And then I was secretly sneaking off to the Orthodox Church for catechism, and it felt kind of, I felt a little slimy. I felt like, okay, this isn't really the right time for me to be doing this. And so I stopped going, and because I met a girl, and all of a sudden my values changed overnight. Just in terms of my openness to that kind of thing,
Right.
I guess.
Right.
But yeah, so I went to some catechism classes. I went to divine liturgy a few times, but I didn't really immerse myself in it for a long time.
Yeah.
But again, I'm kind of in this place right now where it's like I just ended a relationship that I thought was going to be lifelong, and so
Yeah.
I don't think I'm emotionally in a place to.
Yeah.
Or everyone is trying to encourage me, like, don't make big decisions right now.
Yeah. Yep.
I kind of went manic right afterward, and was like, oh, I got approved for a house loan, and was gonna like go buy a house in Dallas and all this stuff, and
Yeah.
everyone's trying to encourage me, just chill out a little bit.
Yeah. It's good
Give yourself.
advice. Don't
I don't like it though.
Don't make big decisions in those moments of transition when you're just kind of upside down.
Yeah. And I think one thing that's troubling me a bit, and I wanted to get your thoughts on this, it's just, one of the things I've done during this time is, I got on the Discord server and have been involved, and I've been listening to you for a while, since maybe like 2019 or so, and especially Pajot, and reading Mathieu's book was really really transformative for me. And the more I've gotten into this space, the more a lot of stuff is falling into place for me, but it's getting harder for me to feel like I want to engage with people who are not in this space. And I don't like what that's doing to me. You know what I mean? And I don't know how to resolve that, or what to do with that, because I don't want to become the kind of person that's so arrogant that he can't be in a normal group with people, like a Christian community, because that seems really foolish and arrogant. But at the same time, there's something just about the sort of overly simplistic, overly compressed view of the faith that is really irking me.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to resolve that.
Yeah. And you're living in the Bible Belt, so that, so, going to church in Texas, how do I know this? I've never lived in Texas. I suspect,
Whatever you're imagining is probably accurate.
yeah, it's out there. I've been in enough places. There are similar communities here in California. I've lived in California, Michigan, and New Jersey and the Dominican Republic for extended period of time. I've known Southern Baptist missionaries. So now when you say getting harder and harder to feel like you don't want to engage with people who are not in the space, are you saying specifically Christian people, or is that true sort of out there in?
Yeah, just specifically among Christians.
Okay.
I mean, historically, especially since I moved to Denver, a lot of my friends were secular.
Yeah.
And I feel comfortable there. But I was like the token Christian in those friend groups,
Yeah.
Which I mean, evangelistically was helpful, but
Yeah.
So all I'm talking about is when I'm sitting among a group of Christians and I feel that kind of cognitive dissonance of like, I want to engage with you where you're at,
Yeah.
but I'm kind of mentally or theologically or philosophically kind of exploring some other stuff, and it's just not congruent to me, and
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I don't think it's a bad thing. Well, your concern I appreciate, and that you have the concern is good. That you don't want to become an anti-evangelical in all the worst ways, while becoming an orthodox ideologue.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, as you well know by virtue of the story that you told about the churches you've been in, I think in the United States we sort of have a bias of imagining that churches are something like movie theaters or gyms. They're basically or Costco. They're an institution that we go in and we have a membership, that your church membership is somehow analogous to your Costco membership. And as you well know, being a part of a church is being a part of a community. And it's a community that's not only horizontal in the people that you're there, but it's also vertical in that you're participating in the tradition of that community. So I don't find it surprising that, given what you've been immersed in and where your thinking has gone, that you increasingly find it difficult to let's say be part of a community that has its own traditions and rituals that you're very familiar with because you grew up in. You're 28, so you're still in a period of life of individuation, in that you're continuing to wrestle with your upbringing. In my experience, especially after 30 to 50 is when people really start to do the hard work of getting, processing the house that you grew up in, the church that you grew up in, and really coming to terms with all that. After 50 is where you tend to settle into, this is my perspective. Up until 30, so you're right in that space between 20 and 30, really. Up until 20, you're sort of making commitments, experimenting, exploring, discovering, and that's all very good. And it sounds like you've done it in a very I think a very authentic way, and that you're not just visiting churches, watching and forming opinion. You've been involved, and being a part of a church is not simply going and showing up and just observing like a non-player character, being an audience. It's doing things in the church and being a part of the mission of the church, whether that's a youth group leader or a deacon or an elder, or running the stream, or cleaning up on Saturdays, all that.
And there's a part of that that's been like profoundly discouraging to me in a way. I mean, like like before I was a youth pastor the first time, I had all these thoughts about like, well, here's what you know, here's how teenagers in the US need to engage with Christianity, and here's how their leaders need to be helping them, blah, blah, blah. Well, you know, and then I step in and do it and realize, oh my goodness, I don't know anything. There's way more, there are many, many more variables here than I ever could have imagined. And it just kind of come to grips with my arrogance, and then coming to terms with the fact that, like, I'm not gonna make the incredible difference I thought I was gonna make. I'm gonna show up and I'm gonna do my thing, and it'll have whatever small impact it might have. And that's, you know, that's it.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't think it bothers me now as much as it used to, but I think there's a part of me that's like maybe transitioning to a place where I'm finally giving up that dream of like making a big difference or something, and just kind of settling for, like, you know, I'm just living a relatively small life, and that's okay. It's actually intended for me, you know. And I don't know. There's just a part of me that's it's I don't I don't know. I don't know what I'm saying with that exactly.
I
But
do know what you're saying, because so for example, let's see, I got married when I was 25. I left the country for the mission field when I was 27. And that was, you know, a similar experience where, you know, I'm going to a different country. I'm learning a new language. I'm engaging with people of a very different culture than I have. I have to do all of that cultural assimilation. I've gotten all of this education. I'm doing all of this, and to get there, and I realize, gosh, what am I doing for these people? There's not a whole lot I can do. I'm helping them. I'm helping the pastors have a little bit of training. I'm 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 trying to assist them to not do overly crazy or destructive things. But then again, I don't know what the heck is going on in their culture. And so it is a very humbling process. And that's a good experience to have in your late 20s,
yeah.
because it's a recalibrating experience. Now, I'll tell you that if you lean into something for 20 years, what you will discover is that in that 20 years, you will grow in wisdom and knowledge and capacity. And after leaning into something, you will actually be able to accomplish something. Now, I'm not saying you'll change how youth ministry is done in North America or anything like that, but you might actually have an impact in the lives of people, and you begin to form relationships, and you will begin to make a dent in a little piece in this world. And so, but you're still asking very, very orienting questions, which are very appropriate at your age. Do I sort of, I would say, I would recommend, in terms of your concern about developing a harsh, unfair bias against a certain group of Christians or a church or a branch of Christianity, just recognize that you have that, and in your mind, sort of give it an avatar. And you give it an avatar so you can sort of zoom away from it and look at it and say, well, there that is. That's when I step into a Baptist church, I get triggered and I listen to them do these things and my eyeballs roll, and just put all that in an avatar and look at it and say, okay, that's that. And it's there. And I've got concerns about that, but I'm not going to derail my life because of that avatar. And by moving it into an avatar and looking at it, you're going to say, okay, I know it's there. There's some good things about it. There's some bad things about it, but I can keep my eye on it because I've differentiated it from myself in a certain way. And I don't have to let that thing possess me. And that then will give you a little bit more agency and autonomy. And sometimes, you might find yourself triggered, and then you recognize, I just, that avatar just possessed me, and I am manifesting that avatar in this place. And I don't really want to do that, but he's also got his point, because there's some crappy stuff there. Well, there's crappy stuff everywhere. And part of the beauty and downside of learning another room off this hallway of mere Christianity is, in orthodoxy, you'll discover much of the same thing. You'll find some, wow, the Orthodox are able to be and to do some things that the evangelicals weren't, but here amongst the Orthodox, there's some of these other things here that, and that's the way it is as you go in from one place to another. And so I don't think it's, people will often come to me and they've been in a job in ministers. This isn't uncommon. They've been in a job or they've been in a church for 2, 3, 5, 10 years. And, it's kind of feeling like a shirt that's a suit that they've grown out of a little bit. And I'll often recommend, I'll say, well, if you get a letter and you get an email or you see a job opening or something, go ahead and just pursue it a little bit and lean into a little bit, because you'll learn more about it as you move towards it.
Yeah. And I think that was helpful for me doing the bivocational thing for a while. Like when I was youth pastor last year, I mean, it was a really cool setup, honestly. Like the high school was right here, the church was right here, and I work remotely. So I moved my software office or desk to this like abandoned coffee shop at the church that was across the street from the high school, right? And so it was this cool, and it was COVID time, so everything's kind of chaos. So they're like coming into one class and then they like have 2 hours off. And so they would wander over to my space and see me working, and I'd be working my desk job, which is really flexible. And then they'd come in there and it was a cool opportunity to engage with them like right in the moment. Like they're seeing me living my normal life, and they're, like maybe they just are angry at a teacher or something just happened at school. So they come in there in a huff and we engage about real life right there. And then, that room is the same place we're doing like youth group night. And so it adds so much more depth to the experience of like how we're engaging with each other, rather than just them showing up and me spouting off some stuff about the Bible and then they leave. And I don't know. So I enjoyed that. But also, I think, yeah, exactly what you're describing. It gave me kind of a sense of like, okay, I've explored the ministry thing a little bit. I'm good without that. Because I had a similar experience to what you're describing. A couple years ago, I flew to Zambia for a couple weeks because I was thinking about, helping with a ministry out there, and it was a disorienting experience, or maybe orienting, I guess, because it's like during the day I was just grading math papers, and then I would go to my little place at night and just get on Reddit and scroll Reddit all night. And it's like, I thought this was going to be some big transformative experience, but it's like I'm the same person here with the same problems and the same ennui, and like this isn't fixing me. This isn't doing anything, and I'm just grading math papers. Like in the grand scheme of things, like what does this mean for people? Yeah. What does it mean for me? Yeah. And so I'm pretty sure I don't want to do the ministry thing full time ever, and I'm happy with that, and I'm happy with the software thing. But I think I still want to live a meaningful life, and I think one of the problems I'm dealing with is just that most of the time, most of the models I have for living a meaningful life are in the context of family, and so a lot of people my age are, getting married, having kids, and that's kind of what they're devoting a lot of their time and energy to, and that's where they're at least hopefully wanting to find a sense of meaning and purpose. And so I guess I'm struggling with like, okay, maybe I'm not going to have a family anytime soon or ever, if not, and if I'm not doing some kind of unusual job or full-time ministry or something, then like what will make life meaningful?
Yeah.
I know that's a really kind of basic question that everybody's asking, but like I don't have a good answer for it.
Yeah. A few thoughts. One is the clock speed of meaning. So you're a tech guy, you understand clock speed and CPUs and some of that kind of stuff. Meaning works at different clock speeds. Some things are sort of immediately meaningful to do, like cleaning the shower. There's something about cleaning the shower that you shower in this little thing every day, and bit by bit it's getting dirtier and dirtier. And then I've had enough. So you go in there on a Saturday and you clean that darn shower, and you sit back and it's all shiny. That's meaningful. I cleaned the shower. Other clock speeds of meaning are really slow, like family. And family, can be deeply meaningful, but there's an enormous amount of monotony and drudgery and that goes into that too, because children grow up in time. And family and marriage is sort of both that way, but it is a fairly reliable, predictable source of meaning in one's life. Now, not everyone marries or should marry or succeeds in their marriage. And so then people look to all kinds of other things, career. Now, it sounds to me though, like, so some people I talk to, I remember watching, there's this rehab movie, 28 Days with Sandra Bullock, that was on a number of years ago. And, you have all these people who are in recovery and, like they all want to sort of jump into marriages and romantic relationships and everything. And, usually the therapist will say, well, first see if you can keep a plant alive. Because if you keep a plant alive, well, there you got something. Then maybe graduate to a cat or a dog. And maybe if you can manage a relationship with a cat or a dog, you're ready to really start to manage a long-term relationship with another human being. So we live in an interesting space where on one hand, we have all these institutions like churches that are sort of consumer focused, but we have a poverty of institutions that, something like monasteries that afforded people, let's say if they're single, an enormously meaningful community and a path to grow on. And so part of what happens in Protestantism is sort of marriage gets swapped out for monastery. And that's not exactly an even trade, because in some ways managing a home and a marriage and a family is more demanding than being a monk. So, and so now if we follow the language, you have vocations. And so, well, okay, so you work in technology and coding. Well, there's a vocation, but unlike, let's say, a monastic vocation that is filled with rhythms of worship and liturgy and all of these things, coding is sometimes just something that I do to get a paycheck. So the replacement of family and career, replacement of monastery for family and career really hasn't quite arrived. And so I would recommend not necessarily forefronting institutions as your only hope for long-term meaning, and instead continue to do some of what you described in terms of your ministry to the youth. In it was, almost any good Christian ministry is primarily about relationships. And, you have the church and its youth ministry, but especially if you're in an aging church that's probably dying, the youth ministry is just sort of one last gasp to not slide off into irrelevance and to have accept the fact that the institutional arc of this church is going to end at 60 years, which is where most of them do. You very quickly realize that what you are putting into those kids, this institution of the church that might even be paying you a little bit of money, or at least giving you a little title or status to do this, they're not going to benefit from any of this. And what you pour into those kids is something no one can take away, because it's fundamentally relational. And so I also think that on the heels of a major disappointment in your life, such as a relationship that you had hoped would arrive at marriage and a family and this whole path, it's very easy to feel like I screwed it up, or it fell apart, or for whatever reason that happened, you don't have to talk about that at all. I can't do it, and this will never come, and I'm not even sure I want it after this.
Yeah.
That'll
Yeah.
pass.
I hope so. Cause I mean, it's honestly, it's ironic to me because I think, like when I graduated college and got serious about the faith and started trying to grapple with the sexual identity stuff, I think I treated it as like, this is my one big thing. And if I can just address that, I'll probably basically be good. Like that'll be my hero's journey, and then it'll be over. And now I'm discovering, oh gosh, this whole thing is fractal. It's there's many cycles and many iterations of everything. And so I guess the point I'm getting at is, ironically, the failure of that relationship, I don't, in my estimation, didn't really have anything to do with the sexual identity stuff, but a lot of other things. But I've always been of this mentality that, oh, if I can just deal with the sexual identity thing, then relationships will work, life will be good, I'll find meaning and purpose and happiness, everything will be fulfilling, I'll just ride off into the sunset and it'll be fine, it'll be great.
Yeah.
And it's not happening. And that's been a really jarring realization. And I feel really foolish for, thinking that, but
You shouldn't. You've been programmed to think in that way since the time you started consuming, Hollywood media in America, because that's exactly what that media sets you up to imagine is the pattern of the world. Yeah. I remember, I gotta be careful what I say here. My marriages are very uneven. Some people are married and they don't have hiccups in their marriage and everything is fine. And almost everybody has more trouble than that. And some people have even more trouble than that, depending on all sorts of things. I used to imagine that, I could resolve struggles in my marriage with my wife by sitting down and reasoning with her. Well, that didn't work at all. And then I imagined that, because I never saw my parents fight. And my older sister was a little better attuned to the fact that if my parents weren't getting along, they tended to do so in silence, but they also tended to make up fairly quickly. And there wasn't very much conflict in my home growing up. And so I didn't have any of that experience in terms of what to expect in a marriage. And then when my wife and I had, various levels of conflict for a whole variety of reasons, I always thought that these things could sort of, they can be reasoned away, they can be explained away, and, then the therapist will dispel it or Christian, and what I very quickly discovered was that there were many things against which I had no weapon. And the resolution of which wasn't about to come, certainly not within 45 minutes or within 2 or 3 weeks or even within a month or a year or even a decade. And some things I just had to begin to realize this probably will not be resolved my entire lifetime. Now what do I do? And so that sort of triumphalistic, optimistic, can-do formation that Hollywood, the culture, the church.
Is that an American thing or a Western thing, or is that just a human thing?
I haven't been anything but an American human, so I can't really say. I think, I don't know, but it is definitely deep within our culture because we tend to live immersed in all of these little stories that either wrap things up in 18 minutes or 43 minutes, depending on, well, now we've got streaming, so we have we have a few weeks to wrap things up, but life is not like that.
And related to that, I mean, around that time that I kind of graduated college and things started clicking into place, I think one of the most helpful things was I was reading the Brothers Karamazov, Dostoevsky. I just stumbled across it at a thrift store. I had never heard of it, but it was a big book and I figured, why not? And I think that's what was, at least part of what was so helpful about that book was it wasn't just a clean arc. Like the main characters kind of kind of a wuss and he's kind of unhelpful to people. He just goes around listening and lets people walk on him. And yet somehow at the end of the story, he's the one left standing, who's the hero, you know? And especially a hero among the youth, these kids who are looking up to him, even though maybe they shouldn't be, you know? And I think that was really impactful to me. I could feel that in my own, story, my own life. And something about that felt very true to me. And I started thinking about like, okay, how can I embody that? Or, and then a scary realization, I think, was maybe the people older than me that I look up to are embodying that also, you know? And so, I talked to a Paul Vanderklay and I'm like, oh, wise Paul, give me your, tell me what to do in life and what direction to head. It's like, well, I don't know. Maybe Paul's just someone like me, but who's a little further down the road and is just trying to figure it out, because there's a part of me that's really tempted to be like, I want to give up on Protestantism, but I'll wait and see what Paul does. Or, Dallas Willard stuck with it somehow. So, that's something. But then it's like, but is Paul or Dallas Willard actually any different fundamentally? Not as far as I can tell, but and I don't want to say that part out loud.
Yeah.
Because there's a part of me that wants to be like, well, no, just make these people I'm going to cling to them. They're going to be my anchor, you know? And then it's disorienting when, my mom came to faith through Ravi Zacharias coming to her community and doing like a kind of revival thing.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, I mean, she hasn't gone through any kind of crazy deconstruction or anything after his stuff came out. She was just kind of like, well, that sucks. But, if she was 30 years younger, it might have had a huge impact on her.
Yeah. And this is also something of the stage of life you're in now too, which is, to a certain degree, we need those saints, those heroes, those ideals ahead of us when we're younger, because they help us navigate, and we have to see them in a certain light, not necessarily because they want to be seen in this light, but we need them to be seen in that light for our needs. In other words, we're bringing something to that. And, that's why you get the saying, the cautioning people to beware meeting your heroes, because you have exactly this realization. And the same goes on with parents. I mean, at some point in adulthood, especially if you have very good parents, you begin to see the clay feet of your parents. You begin to see their pitfalls. Now, if your parents did a really bad job, maybe later in life you begin to see what they did okay, instead of, wow, dad cheated on mom and abandoned the family and took up with, and she then did this. And there's plenty of stories out there like that too. So no, you're right. And this is part of why in Protestantism, for example, Protestantism is a little more reticent to basically to canonize individual human beings. And so on one hand, you sort of need saints that you can look up to and strive towards. On the other hand, Protestantism basically says, yeah, but they're still on this side of the line. And the only one on that side of the line is Jesus, not David, not Moses, but we'll put Jesus there, but nobody else. And so, no, you're exactly right. And I think there's something of American culture in there, of this can-do instrumental culture that says, okay, so I've got this struggle in my life, bang, here's an answer. And you'll find that with, okay, so, and I've seen people do it. Well, this Protestant church, this was crazy. I'm going to go into orthodoxy, and they go into orthodoxy, and maybe they're tremendously blessed, but at some point, if they've got their eyes open, they'll see trade-offs. But again, that is, I think, the age that we're living in, the present age. It's a function of it's a function of this world. And I think you can see that if you look at the story of Jesus, and if you ask the question, okay, let's presuppose Jesus is who Christianity says he is. Why would taking this in this world lead to this kind of reaction to him? Not only then, but all the way up until today. And it's a function of the agent and the arena. And those two are always interacting. And so and part of this is about growing up. I mean, that's what we're doing. And we don't stop growing up, when we hit 21. We keep growing up. I'm in my late 50s now, and there'll be days when it's like, gosh, when will I grow up?
Yeah.
I'll stay up too late and to get up, and it's like, I'm a 58-year-old man. Why don't I know enough to go to bed on time? And I do better at it than I did 10 years ago, partly because my body is less accommodating of my foolishness at this age. And so it's like, go to bed on time, eat right, do the right thing.
Yeah. And I think maybe I part of me, I just need to accept that some of these things I'm not going to figure out, at least for a while, or maybe ever. And I don't know, just that bothers me for some reason.
You're probably an idealist.
Yes, very much so.
My wife's an idealist. It's part of our marriage. She's
right.
Like, why can't it be like this? It isn't. Well, it isn't. And you seem perfectly content with that. Yeah, that's because I'm not really much of an idealist.
Right.
Oh, but then again, sometimes I won't strive and achieve in the way she will, because I'll say, well, I don't know if I'm going to get there. So
I mean, in your experience with stuff like that, how much of that is just like personality, that like that's the way you are and that's the way you're going to be, and how much of it is like, can I grow into a little bit more realism and acceptance of the way things are, or is there a part of me that's just always meant to be this idealist, like things have to be this way?
Both. And you can work really hard to find the line, and what you discover as you pursue that line might be helpful in terms of coming to terms with it, but it's both. Part of it is just how you're wired, and whether that's by genetics or who raised you or what the interaction of all that. There's just way too much combinatorial explosiveness in there to say, this is it. It's kind of the nature nurture thing. It's like, it's both. It's both. And so there are, it's kind of like, how fast could I run a mile? Now, when I was 16 or 18 or 21 or 25, and if I trained really, really hard, I could probably run a mile within these parameters. Now that I'm older, I probably couldn't get up to that. But, there's just so many variables in these questions. Yeah. And it's a good question. But if you're looking at the question in order to do something with the answer, maybe.
Okay. That's fair.
But again, I think it's helpful to recognize that we always see the world from where we're at right now. And that has everything to do with age. You just had a major life event, which is you were making progress to the loss of a dream. When you lose a dream like this, you grieve. That dream is real. And grief, as you'll learn later in life, when you grieve the loss not just of dreams but of people, parent dies, friend dies, you'll learn something about grief, that part of grief just takes time. Because so not only are we always sort of imprinting and recalibrating and updating this map of reality in ourselves, which we do so consciously, but mostly unconsciously. When you take a blow like you just took, there's a major recalibration that has to go on in you. And that recalibrates mappings in you that you're not even aware of. And that's why I've watched, as a pastor of a church with older people, I watch a lot of people grieve. And sometimes it's grieving a spouse. Sometimes for elderly people, it's grieving a loss of agency and power and vitality and opportunity. And all of that stuff has to be brought onto the map and dealt with in an appropriate way. If it isn't dealt with, then you get weird actings out, like, the 72-year-old wearing gold chains and driving a red sports car because in 1975, that was the thing to do. Yeah. And in 2020, you look at him, it's like, oh, he's doing that.
Right. And I think that's what scares me a little bit about the phase I'm entering into, my 30s as a single guy, because most of the people I see in that space, they're either just kind of self-pitying, miserable sad sacks, or they're LARPing in some sense. They're walking around wearing baseball caps backwards and trying to be the cool guy. And it's just really like sad. And I'm like, I don't know.
Well, maybe that's true in Texas. If you move out to California, then you'll find everybody's still single at 30.
That's fair.
It's like single at 30 in California,
right? Well, and yeah, I mean, like when I was in Denver, most of my friends were like that, and so if I told them, like if I go hang out with those friends and tell them kind of where I'm at, they'd be like, what do you so your first big relationship in your 20s didn't pan out? Like, well, welcome to the world, kid. We're thinking about getting married at 35, but it's all perspective, right? I grew up in Alabama, and all my friends in Alabama got married real young, and now I'm like a decade behind the curve. And it's like, it's two different worlds, and it's hard to kind of piece it all together.
Yeah.
But
and what you're also discovering in this moment are, again, and this is typical when you get late 20s and then 30s especially, you start to be able to see the map that you've spent 20, 30 years accumulating. And it's like, why do I feel this way? I had an expectation. Where did that expectation come from? I never gave approval to this expectation on my map. No, but it's yours. This is why people go into therapy.
And I struggle to, I know that I need to do the grieving thing right now. I don't want to do that. And so instead, I'm just working on little personal projects. I made a website to search all your videos a couple weeks ago, stuff like that. And I'm like, just working on goofy things to just distract myself from like the problem that's right here, which is, you're dying, Ryan, and your life's not panning out how you hoped it would. And what are you going to do with that? That's terrifying. I don't want to look at that.
Yeah.
I'd rather, get on the Discord server and look at everyone's doom posting memes and stuff. Like, it's a lot more fun.
Yeah.
It gives me a lot more dopamine.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And that doesn't go away. I mean, we find all sorts of ways to avoid looking at what we don't want to see. And then something will happen or something will come in and we can no longer avoid it. And then we have to face it. But it's often in those moments that we grow. And so, I mean, don't be too hard on yourself with this pattern. Part of it is also, again, our circumstance that you can afford this right now in your life. If you were a 21-year-old woman in Alabama with a 2-year-old, there's a lot less avoiding that 2-year-old and that 2-year-old's needs.
Yeah, no, I've been thinking about, I think you said recently that the meaning crisis strikes the affluent or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like, I think you're right.
Yeah.
You know, I I remember I was maybe 23 or 24 and I read Anna Karenina by Tolstoy. And he kind of hits on that theme in the book. You know, the main character is this kind of angsty guy like me wondering what his life purpose is. And then he sees these peasants who are miserable working the fields, but he's like, in a sense, they're happier than me. And he doesn't know what to do with that.
Yeah.
You know, and that really hit me as like, huh.
Yeah. I learned that with the Haitians that I worked with. These people lived on about 50 cents a day. And, they understood how uncertain their lives were. Boy, their worlds were full of meaning. And, the affluent, you need to be fairly well off to afford a meaning crisis for many people. And the 21-year-old woman in Alabama who's got a 2-year-old at home, her life is full of meaning, and she probably would really love a little bit of rest. And that's kind of where we're at. So, I right before this, I had a conversation with someone who, the connection was bad and it was a very personal conversation. We knew we wouldn't share it with anyone, but, this individual went to the army. And, I've often spoken with people for whom, their experience in the army, even if, maybe they were deployed to Iraq or Afghanistan, tremendously meaningful. Now, lots of other things came along with it too, but tremendously meaningful. And yeah, so I'm not, the way you're talking, you're working on self-knowing, and you've achieved some things already. And so, I'm not too worried about you. That doesn't mean that life, that doesn't mean you're going to get everything you want in life. I mean, the truth is, things come at us in this world that, I think about Chad the alcoholic. I mean, Chad the alcoholic, part of the reason I like, having people on video and with at least a name or an avatar or something in this realm is that we can use them as examples. I mean, Chad the alcoholic talks about his, does he wish he was an alcoholic? Well, that's a difficult question, because he recognizes that his alcoholism brought him to AA, which brought him to having to pursue a meaningful path and a disciplined life that has brought him a job and now a wife, and he's hoping at some point a child. Now, all of this came through a whole lot of wreckage and a whole lot of pain, and the bills racked up in that wreckage and that pain will come due for him, just like they come due for all of us. But it can be a very meaningful thing to work your way out of a really bad spot.
And frankly, I mean, that's kind of my attitude or my feelings towards like my own kind of sexual identity stuff. Like, I'm not happy about it, but I don't know if I would have taken Christ very seriously otherwise, especially in light of just how the world's changing right now. And I think that was also something that was pretty discouraging to me as a youth pastor, because, I mean, I didn't share my story with them. I was trying to be fairly prudent with that, but they would still come to me and say, "Hey, Ryan, I need to share something with you. I think I'm gay. I think I'm bi. I think I'm pregnant. I think Christianity is nonsense," and especially with if they would come to me about sexual identity stuff, it's like, you would think I'd be the perfect person to talk to. It's like, well, the only answer I know to give him is like, you're gonna have to work through a lot of stuff, and it's gonna be really hard, and Christ is there, but you're gonna find him, and that's gonna be really hard and discouraging, and I don't know what to tell you, kid. Good luck. You know, and but like, that's a terrible answer. Anyway.
But the point isn't so much the answer, because what that kid was looking for was someone who they could, you know, what you talked about, me or Dallas Willard. They looked up to you, and what they saw through you was, hey, you know what? I'm not alone in this. And he, you know, he's had maybe not exactly the same, but he's had similar struggles, and he's still here, and he's, he's not on the post office wall, and he's not, but maybe just maybe there is hope, and maybe things will be okay. And maybe there will be people I can talk to, and maybe I won't be alone as I work my way through this forest, and I think, I think about that with respect to the ups and downs of my marriage, the ups and downs of my career. In some ways, I would not be able to talk to people. I would not have the wisdom I have today if my marriage had just been easy. Because I probably would have had all sorts of self-righteousness and self-importance and confidence, which was completely unfounded, because I thought I was doing everything right, because gosh, everything is just dandy, instead of recognizing that maybe just our personalities and circumstance, et cetera. But you will learn things by facing up to hard things that you can't learn any other way. And if John Piper has, a great title, Don't Waste Your Sorrows. That's profoundly true. And the difficulty with hardship and suffering is that many people it embitters. But if you can, and this was, one of the profound things that Peterson said just as he was sort of coming back into public life, with all that akathisia and all the pain he was dealing with, the one thing he understood was, I'd better not let this make me bitter. Because if you work as a pastor or you work as a clinical therapist, you recognize that there are corners people put themselves into, and a big difficult one is bitterness. And once you sort of give your soul to bitterness, it's a tough road back. And usually the only way that gets broken is deeper levels of suffering and hardship, where your life can no longer afford that bitterness just for survival. And that's, and people in recovery have to go through, people in recovery sometimes have to deal with resentment in that way, that their resentments were fueling this, and their father did this, disappointed them in this way, and their mother disappointed them in that way, and the people who were supposed to bless them in life cursed them, and so they are rightfully angry and resentful, and that then gets expressed in all kinds of ways that are self-destructive. And it's like, yeah, you were dealt a bad hand. Now, what are you going to do about it? And at that point, and that path out of that is enormously meaningful.
Well, hope I can go closer to that, and not towards the bitterness.
Well, and so again, in the Christian faith, I think you can lean into going to Christ and bringing these things to Christ and saying, okay, you're my master. The beginning of the Heidelberg Catechism, for example, what is your only comfort in life and in death? That I am not my own, which is completely antithetical to the American way, which says I am my own. Okay, little center of the world, you ready to shoulder that agency? I am not my own, but belong body and soul and life and in death to my faithful Savior, Jesus Christ, was fully paid for all my sins with his precious blood, and has delivered me from the tyranny of the devil. So, with these things, if you're grieving, the cliched but good advice is always, well, you give your sorrows to him, and you pray your sorrows and you pray your tears, and people think they're going to gain something by walking away. I don't know really what you gain.
I've felt very much that in my whole faith journey. Who is it? Is it Peter who, Jesus tells the crowds about eating his body and drinking his blood, and they disperse, and then Jesus
John
turns
6.
to them, he's like, y'all gonna do it too? And is it Peter who responds like, well, where else will we go? Like,
Yeah.
like what you said is weird, and I don't know about that, but well, who else and I feel that really strongly. It's like, especially since discovering Pajot, it's like this whole, and in particular Matthew, just this whole world has opened up of like, oh my gosh, everything is structured like Christ. Like Christ is the structure of reality. That idea has hit me like a truck. And it's like, I don't know, even if I somehow got to where I don't believe Jesus rose from the dead, it's like I still don't know what I would do with seeing this structure everywhere. Like, what else is gonna bring any sense of cohesion to stuff? I don't know.
Yeah.
And I don't know. This is where I am.
We're small. We're small. And we're weak, and we stumble, and we mess up, and all of our heroes have clay feet, and but yet we, faith, there's a reason it's faith and it's not sight, because we lean into it and we long on it, and we act as if all of this is true, and we pursue it. And that's the walk of faith. It's the walk of faith. So,
and I know you probably got to go in a minute, but I mean, just to that point, I mean, I think that's something that struck me so much about Jordan Peterson, coming across him. Like, I think I started contrasting him with, because he says stuff like, I'm not sure if I believe in God, but I'm afraid he exists, or I act as if he exists.
Yeah.
And then you've got the pastor who's getting up there giving his propositions every Sunday about God, but then isn't dealing with his porn addiction. It's like, which of those is the obedient son?
Yeah.
It seems to me that Peterson's closer to the kingdom. But
could be. We don't have a lot of perspective to make those judgments. But the contrast is real. It's, and this is part of the reason Jesus says, be careful with passing judgment, and in a sense says, don't do any judgment. Don't do any more judgment passing than is absolutely necessary for you, because you can find people who are deep in the church tribe, who are deeply troubled and outrageous sinners, and some of the worst kinds of sinners in hypocrisy and self-righteousness. Can find people outside the church tribe that are benevolent and beautiful and all of that. And then you can turn around and actually see those same self-righteous person within the church tribe also have other elements of glory that are unavailable to those outside. And I mean, every human being is so multifaceted, and our ability to apprehend any of them is so limited. And then the judgment through which we look to try to make a summation of them is even more reductive. And that's why Jesus says, careful with judgment. And now we all have to show discernment. We all need judgment in order to know how to deal with one another. We've all got that. But this is part of the reason that the command to love is so liberating. Because you can look at that person who maybe is the self-righteous prig in a church that you think, gosh, after 30 years of being in church, this is the best you've done. And then you can look at perhaps the beautiful person who is outside the faith or of another faith, who seems to have some qualities that certainly outshine this person in the church, and say, Well, what must that say about all of this? It's like, well, you know what? With the command to love, it puts them both on an equal platform. And one might be easier to love than the other in some ways, but maybe not in other ways. And so the beauty about, be careful with judgment, love is, well, at least now I know how to act towards that person. I need to figure out what love looks like and what it requires. And that's, for all of us, usually more than enough to try to wrap our minds around and to act out in the world. So hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I think so. I think I need to go sit with that, and I think that'll probably help me with how I'm feeling about, going to a Baptist church or whatever.
And you're grieving. And you're grieving. And one of the crazy things about being a pastor that I've learned, especially in a case like yours, if someone has just lost a spouse of 50 years, I don't have to remind them as much that they're grieving. But listening to a little bit of your story, just like your friends are doing, hey, buddy, you're grieving. Be a little patient with yourself. Take some time, especially for an idealist, because an idealist will be like, I should be able to get over this grief quickly. Well, you know what? Your body's going to tell you when you're done with the grief, and the rider on that elephant doesn't really have a lot to say about it, because stuff happened on your map that, especially at the age of 28, you don't fully see or understand. And that's why you have friends, and that's why you have time. And the funny thing is that after you've lived long enough, you can look back at different periods of your life and say, this is what I thought back then. Now, later on, that looks different. And that's where, if you grow in faith through your lifetime, you can gain wisdom, you gain perspective, and then you also are able to say to others, you know what? I know what some of that pain is like. And just like with those kids coming to you as a youth pastor, because, they're a decade younger than you, and this world is throwing a ton of things at them, and they had a feeling and then a fear, and I think I'm gay. Oh, okay. Well, talk to me in 10 years. 10 years? 10 years ago, I was 8. Yeah, 10 years from now, you'll be 28.
And I don't know. I'm really worried about that generation. They don't even it's like they weren't even looking for me to convince them that the Bible's true or something like that. They just want something to anchor them to anything. They're really living in the kind of nihilistic age, and in a way that I think even I didn't. And I don't know. They're longing for something.
Yeah.
And I don't know how they're going to get it.
No. And that's why, again, we trust someone bigger than ourselves.
Well,
they might not have a meaning crisis. Poor them. Might not be able to afford it. Well, Ryan, it was great to talk to you. I will send you the copy of this video, and you obviously can share it with whomever you want to. And if you be willing to have me share it on the channel, I'm sure others would benefit from it. But take a look at the video first and make up your mind, and then let me know.
Okay.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Thanks,
Great
Paul.
talking to you, Ryan.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.